Hey guys, it's a model Lead and Steel. Today we're taking a look at the LMT R20 RAHE. Stay tuned. So the LMT R20 RAHE, or HALE in Estonian, is a carbine that was selected by the Estonian Defense Forces following an intense program to replace all of their aging Galils and other rifles in inventory. Lewis Machine and Tool is in Iowa. They're a privately held military contractor that has really taken some of their enhancements to the Stoner rifle and taken it worldwide. They have a few contracts, South America, New Zealand, and now Estonia, for their MARS, or modular ambidextrous rifle system. And that's precisely what Estonia was looking for. They needed an external piston rifle that was fully ambidextrous, and that's what LMT knows well. So like we discussed, it needed to have some southpaw friendly features, and it needed to be an external piston rifle for a reason. The Estonians actually had a scientific study that was done between the M4 family of rifles and M16, basically, your standard internal piston or DI guns, as compared to external piston rifles. And they found that the saturation of carcinogenic compounds and toxins that were exposed to the shooter during the firing sequence were substantially higher in DI guns as compared to external piston guns. And so they decided to go for an external piston rifle to keep some of those toxins, heavy metals, out front, away from the shooter's face. Obviously, with the rules of combat ever changing, the rifle needed to be both lightweight, durable, but also night vision and suppressor compatible. Their aging Galils and other rifle systems kind of difficult to adapt to some of these new aspects of warfare. And so a rifle needed to have like a free float rail that would constantly hold zero in adverse environments, as well as a port setting, or rather, gas porting, that would allow it to be fired both suppressed and unsuppressed without issue. Now, there are a few benefits to the external piston system, particularly with shorter barrels. These systems are less reliant upon dwell time. Really, the gas in the system just punches a short stroke op rod and just sends the bolt carrier flying. And so it's a little more, I don't want to say crude, but it's a little more of a violent action as compared to a traditional DI rifle. As a result, sometimes the bolt velocity is a little faster on these guns, and so they recoil a little harsher. I can say that the LMT, specifically R20, is actually not that bad. I can shoot this thing pretty fast, and I don't really see a measured difference between it and some of my other ARs. Let's start with the lower receiver, shall we? Now, LMT knows how to make a nice ambidextrous lower receiver. They have a bolt catch and release on the firing hand side, and they also have a mag release on the left-hand side. So you can run this gun as a righty or a lefty, hypothetically without issue. In terms of the reloading sequence for a traditional right-handed shooter, you might be thinking to yourself, oh, smacking the bolt catch on the left side is substantially slower than using this new ambidextrous setup. It's really not. I think it's about the same amount of speed. Where I think the bolt catch and bolt release on the right side really comes into favor is when you need to diagnose a malfunction. If you want to lock the bolt to the rear without having to do the little jiggy where you gotta get under the gun, it's very easy to keep your firing hand on the grip and just lock the bolt to the rear using the bottom side of the paddle. Then you can inspect your chamber for whatever's going on. It's a pretty cool value add, and it's nice to see that it's becoming more and more commonplace with both commercial and military manufacturers. Now, LMT has incorporated an ambidextrous safety, as they do on their other MARS, with a trigger that allows the safety to be operated even when the hammer's forward. So if I were to pull the trigger on an empty chamber, hammer goes forward, and I can still put that safety lever in place. It's a very European design. It was called for specifically by the EDF. This is now present, their LMT axle trigger group that allows them to do this. It's now present on all of their MARS rifles moving forward. Now the trigger guard is enlarged here. It's a pretty standard offering from LMT, and it fits the budget for Estonia, and they're pretty brutal winters. A lot of those soldiers need to use gloves and stuff, and so you don't want anything getting in the way of firing the weapon. So behind the trigger guard, we have LMT's in-house grip. They used to ask Ergo Systems to make the rubberized grips for them. Now they're making their own mold in-house. This grip has finger grooves, and when it comes to finger grooves, it's sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe shit. And in the case of this grip, it's shit. I don't like where the finger grooves are placed, and so it forces me to hold the weapon in a way where my wrist is a little lower than I usually am comfortable holding, and so I don't get that positive weapon control as I traditionally do with like a Bravo Company or Magpul grip. It's an easy swap though, so whatever. Behind that we have a QD end plate that comes installed from the factory with very generous staking on the between the castle and the end plate. 6-position buffer tube. This receiver extension is it's gray, not because it's plated gray, but rather it's a like a dry film application process that allows the stock to slide relatively smoothly and decreases the probability of it wobbling on the receiver extension. The factory stock on the R20 RAHE is Magpul's SLK stock. This is an affordable stock. It's small, it's lightweight, but it misses a notable feature of other stocks, traditional LMT soft mod stocks and the like, and that is the inclusion of a QD hole. This just has a sling loop. But the sling loop is also an M-lock slot. So you can take one of those, like, I bet you have like 30 of them in your house. The Bravo Company little QD things that come with your rails, right? Just drop one in there and screw it on and you're good to go. Real quick, let's talk about the axle trigger. This is, by and large, very similar to the standard LMT 2-stage trigger. I don't think they really changed much of the surface geometry, just the inclusion of that safety compatibility. And so you have like a 4.5-5 pound trigger pull. A very, very noticeable wall, relatively clean brake. I mean, for 2-stage triggers, they're better out there. It has a slight roll to it. As for the reset, it's a reset. Now, noticeable inclusion in LMT's rifles, which is not really found in many of the commercial rifles out there, is the inclusion of an H buffer. This is a heavier buffer with a tungsten slug. What this does is it helps reduce the probability, practically eliminates it actually, of a phenomenon called bolt bounce. Bolt bounce in select fire applications is the process of the bolt reciprocating in the action of an M4 or M16 and impacting the receiver extension of the barrel. The barrel by far is the most dense and heaviest part of the upper receiver, and so it's going to reflect most of those kinetic, most of those joules of the kinetic energy back into the bolt carrier, and it's going to pull the bolt carrier out of battery slightly before the buffer keeps that spring pressure on and puts it back in place. The issue is when the bolt is ever so slightly out of battery and the hammer tries to go forward because you're constantly holding down the trigger in a select fire application. So that hammer is going to cycle pretty quickly and it's going to try to impact the firing pin, but it doesn't have a solid hit on it because the bolt carrier is slightly out of battery. So you usually just get a click instead of a bang and a very shallow primer dent. So what the heavier buffer does, the tungsten slugs, is that when the bolt carrier and buffer body move together in unison, impact the rear of the receiver extension, those slugs, those weights, they shuffle to the rear of the buffer body, and then together as a system it moves forward. The bolt strips a round out of the magazine as it presents a fresh round into the chamber, and as the bolt carrier wants to bounce back out of the, out of battery away from the barrel extension, that tungsten slug and those other two steel slugs finally meet the bolt carrier, and they have that, combined inertia to impact the bolt carrier as a dead blow effect to keep that bolt in place. So you get a system that runs reliably in full auto, nary a hiccup there. And it's gassed appropriately to deal with, the added weight of the buffer assembly. So just some small engineering things that are done from these, higher end manufacturers to make sure that the gun runs well. We're not probably going to notice it because obviously these are semi-auto rifles on the commercial market, but it's nice to have. Let's move topside, shall we? Let's start with the upper receiver. This is why I love LMT so much. LMT has patented the monoblock or monolithic upper receiver. This is a quick detach barrel system with a continuous piece of aluminum. This comes from the factory as a forging of 7075 aluminum that's then machined down to this combination upper and rail. It's a pretty tough unit considering that there's no split point between a traditional mil-spec upper and then a free float rail that's then installed. So there's no real weak point from that perspective. And on top of that, the materials themselves are extremely durable. The 7075 complete upper assembly is made out of the same aluminum that your traditional AR lower is made of, and this lower as well. And that's a little different than what the commercial military those markets offer from free float rails. Daniel Defense rails, Geisley rails, etc. All of those free float rails are, by and large, majority manufactured out of 6061 aluminum. That's an objectively inferior metal that's a little more prone to bending and breaking under the conditions that this rifle or this upper receiver would not. Now, there aren't very many reports of that, and I'm not throwing my rifles at walls anytime soon, but if I had to, I think I'd pick the LMT upper and rail combo, which is an objectively superior system in terms of a material perspective as compared to the commercial offerings. The rail is relatively short for the rest of the rifle, but that's because of the gas piston system here. You have the piston head and the gas block that kind of stops the continuity of the rail. So it makes sense. It's a lightweight rail as a result of it, and obviously it's an M-LOK rail, so relatively thin diameter, easy to point and maneuver in between targets. And it just feels comfortable. Feels right at home like you would your traditional Bravo company or Geisley rails. The barrel, let's talk about the barrel. The barrel is like a medium profile barrel. It's a little heavier than what we're used to in the market, but again, this is a select fire weapon. And because it's a 14.3 inch barrel, it's still pretty lightweight for what it is. So I think the Estonians wanted something that could allow for more extended firing sequence without any like real issues of accuracy long term. And obviously with the shorter barrel, they're not really losing a whole lot in terms of the weight gain. The barrel is 14.3 inches, and so for the American civilian counterparts, you have a muzzle device that's pinned and welded in place. This is a Gemtech suppressor mount, and that's what the Estonians liked, and that's what they got. Obviously, their muzzle devices are not pinned and welded in place. It's just something that we have to work with in the industry. The gas valve adjustment lever does not give you a suppressed setting, which is a pretty big downfall of this carbine, I think. From the perspective of us, like commercial shooters here, we'd like to have a suppressed specific setting to kind of choke up the gas port a little bit for the added back pressure that comes from using a suppressor. You don't want to mess with the timing of the rifle too much because you don't want to increase bolt velocity and give those components a shorter service life. Now, it makes sense as to why Estonia didn't want to have that option on their carbines. I don't think they wanted their soldiers to play around with gas settings in the field upon reassembly or whatever it is, and potentially run an unsuppressed rifle in the suppressed setting and cause a malfunction when that gun needs to run. So it makes sense. It's just it is what it is. The gas block though is about as permanently attached as you can make it without welding it. It's pressed in place like you would an AK component. So the inner diameter of the gas block is intentionally undersized compared to the outer diameter of the barrel, so it's a very, very tight fit. And then on top of that, they drill and pin the gas block in place. This thing is not going anywhere. Moving topside, we have flip-up irons that come with the LMT. These backup iron sights are good. They're damn good. Windage and elevation adjustable, very durable for what they are. The issue is they're expensive as hell. If I was building this rifle component by component, I would probably neglect to add these. These are a few $100, and that's like optic money for backup sights. Doesn't make sense to me. Rearward of that, we have the ambidextrous charging handle. The charging handle has two large levers on the left and right side. If you've never played with an LMT charging handle, it's similar to like a PRI. Actuating it from the left side as a right-handed shooter, very easy as you would expect. Vice versa, a little more difficult. The right wing actuation is slightly more difficult to actuate and unlock the charging handle from its recess. Just something that requires a little more due diligence on your part if you're a southpaw. Oh, also, the back end of the charging handle is serrated, so it gives you some good leverage for your thumb. Let's talk about one of my favorite parts of this rifle, the bolt carrier group. Now, the carrier itself is a hard chromed carrier. It's semi-auto cut because that's what LMT does for the commercial market. And there is this like nub that's machined on the dorsal side of the carrier where the gas cube would sit. That's actually the impact point for the piston op rod that punches that bolt carrier rearward, and so being that it's one piece and machined out of the same steel as the carrier, it's nice because it offers a little more reliability and durability for those constant shear impacts on that tail. Now, chrome plating is an excellent plating option. It's been around for quite a long time. It's very durable, and it's nice to see it here on the carrier and their Gen 2 piston systems. And the carrier also incorporates these smaller nubs where traditional bolt carrier rails go. That's mainly as a method to decrease the total surface area contact between the bolt carrier and the upper receiver. So if there's an ingress of foreign materials in some non-permissive environment like sand or dirt or whatever, it can kind of push through those a little bit without getting those grains of whatever stuck between the carrier and the upper. That's all theoretical, obviously. I've never seen sand cuts actually do anything, but I've also never seen them harm the system. So for our bolt carriers, for example, when we manufacture them, we also put sand cuts in those carriers just for the sake of simplicity and added assurance. Now, the bolt in this system is a traditional M16 bolt. LMT does make an enhanced bolt. It's made out of AirMet. AirMet is a super durable steel correlate. It's made for, very high stress, shear impact forces. Most notably, it's used on aircraft carriers to slow down F-16s as they land, and so, those bolts will last anywhere from 80, 90,000 rounds or more. Sadly, it's not in this system. I get why, probably the added cost. The Estonians probably just wanted a basic M16 bolt setup. Now, just a quick note, you can drop an M4 or M16 bolt in this just fine, even with the gas rings. Now, this bolt doesn't have gas rings on it. Obviously they're not needed because the piston system is up here instead of in here. But it's nice that you can just drop like a Toolcraft bolt in this and just run it, and it's probably going to be fine. Cam pin and firing pin are also mil spec, and so there's no like real propriety there either. By and large, the LMT RAHE is an excellent rifle. You're getting fantastic top-of-the-line material choices for the majority of the components here. You're getting a really cool quick detach barrel system that allows you to swap in their DI or other piston barrels within this upper. If I wanted to drop in a 10.5 or 11.5 just DI barrel, all I have to do is just pop those two screws, pull the entire barrel assembly out, and then put my barrel in and my DI bolt in, and it'll work just fine. Shooting the LMT RAHE is pretty much like shooting any other gas gun. Most of these piston guns usually recoil a little more, but in my experience, this thing was actually pretty tame. I'm not sure what port setting they used, but on this 14.5-inch barrel, I didn't really feel like I was slowed down by the gun itself. Now, I did have one malfunction with this rifle, and I think it was just an underloaded round. It ejected out of the chamber just fine, but it didn't pick up the next round. I don't think that's the fault of the rifle. Honestly, I've ran, lighter loads and heavier loads through this thing and haven't had a problem since. Now, the last thing that everyone wants to talk about is cost. Everyone knows LMT probably going to be a little more expensive, along with Knight's Armament and some of the other, higher end guns. It's not a, $1,000, $1,500 gun. This thing retails for $3,500, which is a lot of money for a gun. Otherwise, it's a good rifle. It's, gassed appropriately. Very durable, cool system, being that it's external piston. I don't get any gas to the face shooting it, which is always something that bugs me when I'm running like a suppressed rifle without any real changes to the system to mitigate that gas, which is nice. And yeah, it's just LMT quality, man. You can rely on it. It's a hell of a setup. So that's the LMT R20 RAHE. It is a excellent rifle, external piston, works great, relatively lightweight for what it is. Haven't had any major issues with it, and I'll certainly be doing my part to replace some of the nitpicks that I have with it. Like I said, it's kind of pricey, but it's a good gun made by good people in Iowa. The Estonians are certainly very happy with their carbine, and I am as well. So thanks for watching. If you want to support the channel, please head over to our website. We would be humbled to have your business. Thanks and take care.